For 23 years, the U.S. government poured $20 million into a classified military program. Their objective was to train psychics to act as spies. Yes, taxpayer money was officially funding what sounds like a parlor trick. It's easy to look back and wonder how defense officials authorized millions for mind reading. But you have to view this through the lens of the Cold War. The United States was operating in a severe intelligence vacuum. Mutually assured destruction was reality, and the Iron Curtain divided Europe. Getting human assets behind enemy lines to verify Soviet capabilities was nearly impossible. At the same time, reports were flooding in that the massive Soviet intelligence apparatus was aggressively researching unconventional warfare and parapsychology. Traditional espionage networks were failing to penetrate Soviet secrets. In the blind spot of the Cold War, the military sought a tactical advantage in unconventional territory just to maintain a sense of security. Peeling back the layers of this operation reveals a deeply structured, bureaucratic approach to the paranormal. The initiative operated under a rotating list of obscure code names over the decades: Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, and Center Lane. But the methodology truly crystallized under a sub-project called Scanate, which stood for Scanning by Coordinate. To prevent sensory leakage or subconscious guessing, researchers stripped away all context. Subjects were given only the longitude and latitude numbers of a target site, nothing else. Eventually, all these highly compartmentalized efforts were consolidated under the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA, becoming the massive umbrella program known as Project Stargate. These protocols and code names established a fully funded, highly structured military initiative hiding behind a layer of federal bureaucracy. You might be asking how intelligence directors signed off on this. The answer lies in California, at the Stanford Research Institute in the early 1970s. The CIA didn't hire mystics to run the program, they hired physicists. Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff were brought in to apply strict scientific controls to anomalous phenomena. Their first major test subject was Ingo Swann, a New York artist who claimed to have out-of-body experiences. Swann and Targ coined the term remote viewing. They defined it strictly as the ability to perceive a distant or hidden location using only the mind, separating it entirely from traditional clairvoyance. The SRI team placed Swann under intense scrutiny. They moved away from subjective interpretations and demanded measurable data in highly controlled environments. In one defining test in 1972, Swann was placed near a heavily shielded magnetometer, a highly sensitive physics instrument buried in a vault. Swann reportedly focused his attention on the interior of the device and altered its magnetic field, creating a physical disturbance on the chart recorder. The SRI data transformed these magnetometer readings into a statistical anomaly. It provided the first reproducible evidence that a human mind could interact with a shielded device, offering the CIA a theoretical path to turn lab research into a functional intelligence asset. Once the agency saw the lab results, their posture shifted. They moved from passive observation to active operational deployment. The success in a lab environment gave way to the pressure of field operations. Deploying a remote viewer against a live, hostile target required the military to translate research into a functioning tool of espionage. It is hard to process that the government took academic studies on extrasensory perception and used them to build an actual psychic spy network. But controlled conditions weren't enough to satisfy military commanders. They needed to know if a human mind could actively penetrate enemy lines and retrieve actionable intelligence. In 1974, the program tested a new recruit named Pat Price. As a retired police commissioner, he hardly fit the profile of an international spy. Handlers assigned Price an incredibly high-stakes target, Semipalatinsk, a heavily guarded Soviet research and testing base deep behind the Iron Curtain. No conventional spy or aircraft could get anywhere near this facility without risking an international incident or starting World War III. Given only coordinates, Price entered a remote viewing state. He immediately began feeding the researchers detailed descriptions of the hidden Soviet facility. He called out specific architectural features, including massive, unusual grass-covered bunkers designed to blend completely into the landscape. Days later, U.S. spy satellites passed over the coordinates and confirmed Price's physical descriptions with terrifying accuracy. This panicked intelligence analysts. The mental images Price produced were so precise that officials initially assumed he had somehow stolen classified blueprints of the facility. The final truth was much harder to swallow. There were no blueprints to steal. Price was genuinely perceiving the base with his mind. For the CIA, this triggered a severe operational shift. The Pat Price session moved remote viewing from the realm of academic theory to a functioning method of intelligence gathering that bypassed physical borders entirely. An ability previously dismissed as impossible had been scientifically validated and deployed effectively against a foreign adversary. Pat Price was only the first field test. As the Cold War escalated, the CIA's paranormal operations were about to go much deeper into the dark. In the 1970s, the U.S. government spent millions testing psychics in civilian labs at the Stanford Research Institute. But researchers quickly realized that studying extrasensory perception in a sterile environment would only get them so far. They needed dedicated operatives who understood the battlefield. They found their ideal candidate in U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer Joseph McMoneagle. A seasoned Vietnam veteran, McMoneagle was recruited into a highly classified intelligence unit at Fort Meade, Maryland, and officially designated Remote Viewer No. 1. By 1979, the Cold War was at a fever pitch. Traditional American intelligence networks were hitting dead ends, consistently outmaneuvered by the vast, opaque military apparatus of the Soviet Union. Commanders handed McMoneagle an assignment that defied conventional espionage. They asked him to locate a massive, highly classified Soviet weapons facility, giving him absolutely zero coordinates, photographs, or traditional intelligence to work from. Faced with a total intelligence blackout, the U.S. military abandoned its usual skepticism. The Pentagon began integrating the paranormal directly into its tactical toolkit, prioritizing raw operational results over scientific precedent. Sitting in a quiet room thousands of miles away, McMoneagle began describing his target. He sketched out an enormous, entirely new class of Soviet submarine, noting it was hidden inside a secret facility just off the Baltic Sea. Traditional military analysts reviewed his session transcripts and scoffed. The dimensions McMoneagle described were so massive that officials wrote the report off as a wild hallucination, claiming no submarine of that size could exist. A few months later, high-resolution satellite imagery captured something emerging from that exact Baltic location. It was the very first Typhoon-class submarine, validating McMoneagle's vision down to the precise design and layout. The intelligence was hard and actionable. The military now had proof a psychic asset could successfully pinpoint top-secret foreign weapon systems without leaving Maryland. That single intelligence victory provided the irrefutable evidence the unit's commanders needed. It secured millions in ongoing funding and cemented Project Stargate's operational legitimacy for the next decade. Fast forward to 1988. Project Stargate has survived multiple presidential administrations, but behind closed doors, the broader intelligence community is tearing itself apart over whether any of this actually works. You have one faction clinging to the operational reality. These are the field commanders and military brass pointing directly to the Typhoon submarine and hostage tracking operations, arguing that the psychic data, however strange, is actively yielding results. On the other side of this map, the public reality camp saw unscientific noise, arguing remote viewing was impossible to replicate in labs. The military cared strictly about pragmatic hits, while scientists demanded rigid, replicable consistency that extrasensory perception simply wouldn't yield. This ideological stalemate completely paralyzed Project Stargate. Unable to reconcile the field successes with the laboratory failures, the program languished, becoming incredibly vulnerable to outside audits and budget cuts. By 1995, the program's luck finally ran out. The Central Intelligence Agency officially took over Stargate, initiated an external review, and rapidly declassified the existence of America's psychic spies. The media fallout was instantaneous. News networks and late-night comedians openly mocked the idea that the Pentagon had spent $20 million employing government clairvoyants to read minds and stare at goats. Following the media circus, the CIA delivered its official verdict through a contracted research group. The data collected over 20 years was statistically significant but operationally unreliable. That beautifully bureaucratic contradiction gave the agency exactly what it needed. By admitting the psychic phenomena was statistically real, but labeling it too messy to use in the field, they justified pulling every single dollar of funding. The closure of Project Stargate had little to do with its operational track record. The program was dismantled because the optics of paying for psychics had become a massive public relations liability for the Defense Department. But if you look at how the government actually operates, the CIA's official explanation leaves a gaping logical hole when it comes to return on investment. The United States military is the most ruthless, results-driven organization on the planet. They do not tolerate failure, and they certainly don't bankroll useless experiments for long. We are expected to believe the Pentagon spent $20 million and 23 consecutive years funding a machine they ultimately determined was completely broken the entire time. That official dismissal looks even weaker when you realize that despite the public declassification in 1995, a massive portion of the Project Stargate operational files remain highly classified to this day. The declassified timeline suggests the 1995 verdict served as a controlled exit from a PR nightmare. In reality, the military had spent 20 years refining a system that worked, even if the data it generated was impossible to explain. Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling question. In an era defined by billions in dark money and complex new geopolitical threats, did the American psychic spy program end in 1995, or did it just go deeper underground? Thanks for joining us for another War Dossier. Keep your eyes open, and we'll see you next time.